a session about justice, the view of justice, and what we titled this session, it's Let's Talk About Abortion. So we're just want to pray before we open up, and or pray to open up rather, and then we're going to continue this session and the discussion on abortion. So let's all pray right now. Amen. Lord Heavenly Father, thank you, Father, for everything, God. We ask you for your guidance and your blessing today, God, as we continue the discussion and the session on Let's Talk Abortion, or Let's Talk About Abortion. We know this is a very sensitive topic, but also an important one. So we ask you for your guidance in every single thing, God, and for those that are listening as well, that they can consider all the facts, consider how you view abortion, whether it's ethical or not ethical, God. And we know, Father, for a fact that we were created in your image, God, and I know that you're going to allow us to discuss those points, Father, through the guidance of your Holy Spirit. So bless us and bless all those that have connected, and thank you, God. Amen. So thank you once again for connecting with us. I am your host, Pastor Nestor Rodriguez, and we have a guest with us.
God bless you. Welcome.
Amen.
Evangelist Hector.
Amen. So we're going to continue the discussion on Let's Talk About Abortion. But before we go into this session, we just want to give a recap of what we talked about 2 weeks ago. And we started off with abortion, and we gave the definition of abortion, which we explained was the termination of a fetus and an embryo, or embryo and a fetus, whether through expulsion and voluntarily and involuntary, which involuntary is referred to miscarriage, and voluntary refers to the actual taking of a life, or the termination of an embryo and a fetus by will. And abortion really, almost exclusively, like we pointed out, Hector, it deals with that aspect, right? The termination, the willful termination of an embryo or fetus, whether an early term or late term as well. So we talked about that. We gave the definition on that, and hopefully, for those that don't know the definition, might have a little insight, might receive a little insight today of what abortion is to that definition, that brief definition that we gave today. Also, we talked about whether or not a child has intrinsical, or the unborn has intrinsical value.
Right.
And we spoke about that, how human beings have intrinsical value, and why the unborn has intrinsical value. We stated the reason why the unborn has intrinsical value is because it's a human being. It's been right, the DNA. We can't, it's undeniable, right? Scientifically, biologically, it's undeniable, right? As a person, human being, have intrinsical value. So we discussed that, and we gave the reasons why the unborn has intrinsical value. And also we talked about those points of that intrinsical value, that the fetus or embryo is an actual person, right? Through medical terms, the process of how humans come into the world, right? Between the mother, father and the mother, and they give birth. The mother gives birth to a child. So that process, and within the womb of the mother, that fetus, the embryo fetus, has life, right? And it breathes on its own, or being attached to the mother rather. It extracts oxygen because of the mother, right? So we know that as the embryo goes into a fetus, or evolves, because we could use that terminology, is a change, because evolve means that, right? To change. So as the embryo grows into a fetus, you can see there's been actual doctors that have stated that they witnessed, like within 18 weeks, there's a translucent in the skin of that fetus, because it's a fetus at that time. You see the actual fingers, the fingernails growing on the fingers, and also the toes as well, and the arteries, the arteries in the body, because at that point in time, the skin is translucent, so you can see the arteries running through the entire body of that fetus, but it actually looks like a human being. So it's undeniable, right? With those pictures, you can't deny that it's not a person, it's not a human being, because it is, definitely. And we know that humans can give birth to dogs or mammals or felines, any other creature, because we are of our kind, and every other creature is of their kind. Whether it's a dog, right? And we know that dogs give birth to dogs. Whether it's a horse gives birth to a horse. So you don't see within creation or any animals, even insects themselves, right? They give birth to whatever their kind is. So we know that we give birth to human beings. So they're humans. So we talked about those points, and we give argumental points as well. We stated the different positions on abortion. So we have the pro-abortionists, right? Those for pro-abortion. They're for pro-choice. There's another terminology for it. We have the moderate view, which some believe that it is possible to abort a child, depending on the circumstances, right? And then you have the view that you and I hold, which we're pro-life, right? So we're against abortion, and that's a view that we hold because we see that there is intrinsic value in human beings, right? That they're persons. The unborn is a person, and so we take it as, yes, a person, as a human being. And if it is a person, and we stated at that section, if it is a person, it has intrinsic value. So no doubt about that, right? Intrinsic value. So that's where we stand at. And we gave different definitions on the stance of the pro-abortionist or pro-choice, because that's where we really make our stance against, right? Being pro-choice, pro-life, you and I. We stand on that principle that it is a human being. So we give argumental positions or points from the pro-abortionist stance, and we noted a couple of them, which deals the privacy argument, right? And we touched on those points. The privacy argument that one has having privacy of oneself, one's body, you can make your own decisions, and no one can say otherwise, right? And they use that, and you could say it bleeds off into what their position, their argument is that, well, if this is my body, I have privacy, I can do anything with whatever's in my body, anything that constitutes part of my body. So that argument, right? That part of argument. And you have quality of life argument, and I don't know if you want to say something with that, the quality of life argument. I know that's what we touched on at that time.
Yeah, it's to make it simple, it's understanding if the abortion will have other lasting effects within a family setting or within a even single parent setting. Whether that child will become a burden, whether that's financially making them struggle, or if the potential things that the child comes out with a deformity or some type of medical issue. And this is the argument that the pro-abortionists use, weighing these matters to determine if it's worth keeping that life of the child. And this is something that we'll discuss even more.
Yes.
So we, want to dig into that and explain also how this view does not have like a complete sense to it, and it's not fully stable.
Exactly.
Even in the stance that it holds.
Exactly, and that's so true. And also we have the non-personhood argument, and this is where really they dig their ground into, their heels into, right? Because if a child, unborn, has a physical body, now you have a big issue. A big issue because if you state the unborn as a person, and there's principles how you identify an individual or human beings as having being a person, that personhood, personality. So those are that one right there. The personhood argument is really the basis, the biggest point, and you have to factor that in, because if you don't factor that in now, whether or not the unborn is a person, now if it's classified as not being a person, now you can do whatever you want, right? You make a decision, well, I'm aborted because it's not a person. And labeling the unborn as not being a person, that means they don't have intrinsic value. But if you label them as a person, now they have, being a person, it comes with them that intrinsic value that every human being has, every person has. And we know for the fact that only those that are persons or considered persons are human beings, not any creature. An animal is not considered a person, doesn't have a personhood, and there's reasons for that. And I know for the lack of this session, we're not going to discuss the reason why animals are not considered persons. You know, we're just talking about abortion, which relates to human beings. So we gave those points, those argument points that the pro-abortionists used. And I think we really spelled it out at that time, right? At that first session, Hector, right? We really spelled it out, pointed out those arguments, those points that they have. And within the non-personhood, or how to define what is a person, there's other definitions they use to classify what is a person, which is functionalistic definition and essentialistic definition. So we touched on those two definitions. And can you give us a little hint about those two definitions? For those that missed the first session.
Yes. So functionalistic definition under personhood is being able to identify a person, of course, based on how they function or how they should function, whether that's psychologically,
yes.
Physically, and all the other aspects, even personality-wise, the characteristics that we have as a person, that all falls under functionalistic.
Right, exactly. Then essentialistic is that capacity, right? That potential to be there. So we touched on those two definitions. More so, we touched on the definition of functionalistic definition, because I think that's the most prominent definition. So that's what they hold on really to, right? The pro-abortionists, the pro-choice, they really hold on to that definition because they all deals with the personhood of the unborn, whether the unborn is a person. So we touched on those positions, those definitions as well, and also the positions within the pro-abortionists that some of them are agnostic or hold to that agnostic position, was they're uncertain whether or not the unborn is actual person. Right? So that uncertainty.
Yeah, always have
Right, have no clue when or if the child is actual a person within the mother's womb. And that same agnostic view is used for God as well.
Yeah.
So, if God does exist, how can we really know Him? When did He come into existence, right? Then you have the gradualistic position that the embryo, the fetus, gradually becomes to be a person, right? At some point in time. And it's funny because at some point in time, it's either, I don't think it could be, Hector, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it really, there's no way you could say that something is not or it is. Like, you can't hold those two positions. Either it is or it's not.
Yeah, you would know that since the very beginning.
Exactly. So, just like, for example, when a horse is born, you know it's a horse. Mm-hmm. Or even when the female horse conceives, you know it's a horse. And I don't think anybody says, well, that's a different creature or something else, right? It's a horse. Yeah. So they know it's a creature. It's the same thing it should be with us as human beings. When we're born, we're conceived, right? Our mothers conceive us. That whether we're persons or we're not persons, we know that we're persons. It has to be. It can't be that we gradually come into being a person. No, you're either a person or not a person. And then you have the decisive moment theories, in other words, that, and touch on this real quick, Hector, that decisive moment theory. What is that? For those that missed it.
Mm-hmm. That a little bit different than the gradualistic position where you have to go through a process to become a person. But the decisive moment theories is that your personhood is a exact moment, and if you basically pass that point in time, then you are categorized as not being a person.
Right, you missed it, right? So it's in other words that there's certain events in our lives that take place that if you miss that moment, you miss that whole event.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with the personhood of a unborn child, that they'll become a human being at that time, but if you miss it, you don't even know when they became a person. It's crazy. So those things that we touched on, all those things, and now we want to get into this section, which deal with our point of view being pro-life and our stance. And the reason why we consider the unborn a person, I know we laid that out before they have intrinsic value, but why we consider abortion unethical. And it's very important for us. So before we get into our points, we want to lay out that there are issues with abortion scientifically, medically, for sure. And so let's get into that, Hector. The reason why there's issues through a medical standpoint when someone has an abortion. So tell us a little bit, what takes place to a woman after they have an abortion? Well, what takes place? What happens?
Well, a lot of studies have been shown, about women who are willing to at least share their experience after having an abortion, whether that's a few days or even years after that. And most mothers will report that they have experienced not only physical complications within their body, that their body then has to basically repair itself and catch up to its normal functionality, but also just the psychological aspect that that they are now missing a child, and that they had to go through that process to to confirm that they were willing to take that life and make that full decision. So that's something, of course, that will last a lifetime.
So there are actual complications, and the reason why we're bringing this, I believe, from our stance, is because what abortion brings with it, for a medical stance, that there are complications. There are physical complications, and there are also psychological ones. Right? You pointed about how the body has to repair itself, because there are complications. And I know that we have an article here that relates to at least one point on each.
Yes.
One example for each. Because doing our research, there are many complications, and to bring every one of the complications, that whether on the physical or psychological, will take a lot of time. So we just want to hit on them briefly.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we just took one example of each, whether complication, whether physical or psychological. So what does that author, what does she say in her article?
Sure thing. So this article is titled "Abortion Complications," written in 2013 by Carrie Gordon Earl, and she basically goes on to say 17% of women participating in a study on the effects of abortion ended up reporting that they had experienced, again, physical complications, specifically abnormal bleeding or pelvic infection that would affect their body since the abortion. And based on the report, abortion statistics, they represented 200,000 women annually experiencing physical complications after an abortion.
So,
200,000.
Wow, that's a big number. And the study is only 17% of women participating in that study. So the physical that's just one of the physical complications. And like we stated earlier, in order for us to state every complication, it's going to take us a very long time. If we love this process, the session will be a lot longer than what we intended to be. So that physical, abnormal bleeding, and we know that if a woman goes through a process, we know that monthly process, that menstrual cycle period, but it says abnormal bleeding.
Uncontrolled.
Exactly, uncontrolled. This reminds me, Hector, and I know we're both Christians and we read the Bible, we study the Bible, about that woman that had the issue of blood. Yeah,
it says that, briefly, that she, would spend her whole life spending all her money trying to fix this issue that even the expert doctors could not do.
Right, the expert doctors at her time. So there was an abnormality to her bleeding.
Yeah.
Not just that regular cycle period that women go through monthly, but there was an overflow, you could say, right? Excessive bleeding that she had. So these women that participated in this study went through a similar circumstance.
Yeah.
So they were bleeding abnormally during their time. And the study doesn't say how long they were bleeding for, but they were bleeding. And also that pelvic infection.
Yeah, we can imagine the daily life that it will affect that woman, you know, daily having to experience this bleeding, having to probably follow up with multiple appointments realistically, how much of a burden that has to be.
Exactly. And trying to deal with the situation, there's a sense of urgency, especially in a woman when they have an excess or abnormal bleeding. I mean, why? Why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
Why is this taking place? And it can be contributed to an abortion, right? So she goes on to as well, right? She touches on the psychological. So what does she state on that? Like what she refers to psychological?
Sure. So she wanted us to understand, yes, it's not only a physical issue that women can confront, but also the psychological. She goes on to say, after an abortion, women can experience psychological reactions ranging from guilt feelings, nervous symptoms, sleep disturbance, and regrets. Also, as many as 10% of women experience serious psychiatric problems following an abortion. So these are long-lasting issues,
psychological effects. It affects a woman. And it's crazy because that statistic there says 10% of those experience severe psychiatric problems.
Yeah.
And whether it deals to schizophrenia, issues with the mind. So it's really tremendous what abortion could do to a woman.
Yeah.
So obviously guilt feelings, and I think we know why. Having that feeling of guilt. And one of the reasons why I took someone's life.
Yeah.
I didn't allow my child to be born into this world. I stopped them from having a life, from progressing, becoming the person that I desired that child to become, come into. So feelings of guilt, regrets, obviously regrets, I should have never done this. So those are some of the complications, of the many complications that exist for a woman that has an abortion. And even so, and it doesn't say that survey doesn't state, it says women, but it doesn't state whether a youth, a teenager, it doesn't state it, right? So whether or not this deals with just women that are adults or youth, we know that the problems exist for both, for teenagers and also for adults as well. So it's amazing. So let's continue on. And then we're going to touch on something that perhaps for some, when they hear this, they're going to say, wow, is this really true, right? So can you kick it off with what else? How abortion is actually viewed?
Yeah, so when we began to talk about this section, we wanted to understand the cruelty that might be behind it, or if it is an inhumane act. So we ended up finding out that there is actually 6 different abortion methods that an individual has to choose from, and these include both surgical and non-surgical methods to use.
Yes, exactly. So the non-surgical, what is exactly the non-surgical, Hector?
Sure thing. So the most common for the non-surgical is 3 different options. First is the abortion pill. This is basically a 2-step process that a woman is first administered a certain drug to block the hormone that keeps the egg from fertilizing in her body. Then within 48 hours, another drug is given to trigger the contractions and bleeding in order to force out the embryo from the body.
Wow.
That's the abortion pill.
That's the abortion pill.
Mhm.
Okay, what's the other types?
So then, secondly,
What
we
other
have,
types, rather?
sure thing, we have the morning after pill, and this, in a similar way, it prevents conception from the very beginning and delays ovulation within 72 hours, and a woman has taken the pill after she has had intimacy. Again, the egg cannot be fertilized, so then it is expelled from the body. It's pushed out by force.
Wow, so it's actually pushed out.
Yeah.
So those are two pills, and there's another device, right, or another method for non-surgical, which is what's just that? What's the last one?
So the last device, you can search this device up, basically it's called an IU device, and this is a T-shaped device that acts as a blockage once it is inserted into the uterus of the womb.
So that one's actually that one's actually a form of birth control.
Correct. Yes.
Right, so I don't think there's too many issues with that, right? Because that's controlling one's body, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So those are three methods to non-surgical.
Yes.
So now we're getting into the surgical ones. That when we really discuss these three acts, I think it's horrendous, from my point of view. So let's dig into it. What's the first one?
Sure thing. The first surgical method, again commonly used, is called the vacuum aspiration abortion. And this is when a tube is inserted into the womb, and the contents of what's in the womb is then sucked out by that vacuum that you're using.
Wow. So, and we know with a vacuum, right, is enclosed contraption, and you use it, and whatever you're intending to, because what it does is it actually sucks, right? It's a suction process.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what a vacuum does. And I think this is something that commonly we use in our households. And we know what a vacuum does, right? If you have rugs in your home, you know the suctional power that a vacuum has. But this relates not to vacuuming your rugs or your carpets. This relates to actually vacuuming out. And they put contents, but I can't see being contents, right? You're actually vacuuming out what is the body of an unborn child. Because when we use contents, I think contents really, you can use that, really relates more to a contents of a vehicle.
Yeah.
You know, like components and stuff like that. But it doesn't sound so ugly when you say contents. But when you say the organs, you know, when you say the tissue, and then that becomes a reality. I mean, a picture, right? A reality in our minds that what you're actually sucking out, it's not contents. You're sucking out blood, tissue, organs, members of the body, of the unborn child's body. So this is, to me, if we can't see this as being cruel, I think something we really have to ask ourselves, how are we really viewing this? Because if we don't see it as being cruel, I think something could be wrong as the way we consider or define what cruelty is. Right? And I don't know if I'm wrong with that, Hector.
No, definitely, yeah. We have to be able to confront these views and ask ourselves these questions. Is it really cool?
Right, exactly. So it has to be, we have to really ask these profound questions to ourselves. So what's the next one after that?
Sure thing. The next one, surgical, is dilation. I'm saying that correctly, and evacuation. And this is the process that enlarges the cervical canal with tools known as dilators. And it involves, again, suction from the womb, or the use of a, how do you say this? Beretta.
Yeah, Beretta ball.
And that's when you scrape out, again, the contents, or as Pastor Nestor said, the organs and the tissues. So it's scraping out with basically like a knife function, and using the suction as well. So it's a two-step process.
So it's a two-step process. You're scraping out, you're sucking and scraping out. So whatever's left within inside the mother's womb, they're actually scraping it out and then using the vacuum to suck the body all the tissue. And we have to state it that way. We have to say it's tissue. We have to say it's blood. We have to say it's the organs, because if we don't do that, and then that's not reality. Reality is that you're sucking out the baby, the body. So that's the actual reality. And when we sugarcoat things, it doesn't really impact us as when we tell the truth about it.
Yeah, we become desensitized.
Exactly, we become desensitized. In our worlds, we're full of being desensitized because we see violence all the time. We hear it all the time. We see it on the news. We hear it through the radio. We bought in cases as well, so we have become desensitized. And I think by using same content, we're desensitizing ourselves too.
Sure.
So what's the last one, Hector?
And finally, for surgical is this is considered to be the partial birth abortion, and of course it sounds just like it is. It's the extraction of the body before sucking out the contents of the skull, which kills the unborn child before the whole body is extracted, mind you, and then afterwards the intact fetus is removed from the woman. So they basically rip out all of the organs.
So let me get that right, because I have it here as well. Extraction of the body before sucking out the contents. So the baby is actually aborted out, and after it's aborted, according to this, and then the child, which it kills the child, right? The extraction.
Yeah, from that.
And then the skull, and it's sucked out. So you're sucking out the brain, and whatever it entails the brain as well. So that's very horrendous.
Yes, and this is partial birth, so a little bit more developed than.
So what is partial birth in essence? I know it's just partial birth, but when we mean partial birth, how old is the child? How was the unborn at that time, more or less?
You can expect it to be a little bit more developed because the mother is involved, of course, to be able to push the process. So
it's
they have more access to be able to grab the body.
So it could be like 6 months.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. So you see the baby intact, the body. You know it's a human being, and if we can't consider that cruel, and I know for a fact that is cruel, especially the way we view it, because that's a human being. You're taking the life of an actual human being, not contents, not anything else, not an organ. Because sometimes we do need surgical. We do need surgery, right? Because sometimes our organs stop the function the way it should function. So there has to be some type of repair, some type of surgical method to heal us, heal our bodies. So we're not referring to those things. We're not referring to one is surgery that deals with healing.
Yeah.
We're talking about surgery that deals with extracting another human being, and that one, partial birth abortion, which kills the unborn child. That's what it says here.
Yeah,
that's the same thing I'm reading from what you have, right? So what we brought together. So it's very cruel. Very cruel.
As you mentioned, it's not preserving life at this point.
No, not at all. Not at all. So if that's the case, okay, that's real horrendous. That is a cruel act. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hector, and I know we put this together.
Yeah.
Does the fetus, the embryo, feel pain? Any type of pain?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, Nestor, because the old abortionist view was very uninformed, and they will argue this because of the lack of research and technology that we have today, and they would say no, the embryo or the fetus cannot feel pain. But to answer that question, yes, it can actually feel pain, definitely. So
it actually can feel pain because they have that, they're sensitive, right? And that stimuli factor, right? The stimuli. So, and I know we discussed this in our previous session, that the baby feels when the mother is singing to the baby, that because that stimuli is there.
Yeah.
And the baby and the fetus feeling, having that sensitivity, feels the movement of the mother, hears the voice of the mother, right? The vibration. So that's the feel. So the baby, the fetus does actually feel pain.
Sure, definitely. It's even known that a fetus, of course, when a mother is stressed, that they even receive all of that. So we can imagine how much that they're receiving from that stimuli throughout the fetus.
Exactly. And not just that, but also, and I know you touched on this before, because I remember one of your sermons that spoke about using, when you spoke on Samuel, the mother, the angel told the mother, because he was going to be a Nazarite, right, he had to have that vow.
Correct.
And the mother had to stay away from alcoholic beverages.
Yes.
Right? And that is still, you hinted at that time, you pointed out, that to this day that practice still takes place. That the doctors tell the mothers that are expecting, all right, stay away from alcohol, stay away from any type of dangerous content that's going to harm your child. So to me, once I hear that, harm the child, that means the child's going to feel some type of pain, right? Feel pain, and also that it might develop something later on in the future.
Yeah, negative reactions to the choices that a mother might make.
Exactly. So it feels pain. So the fetus embryo feel that pain when they're being aborted.
Correct.
Being extracted, vacuumed out, sucked out, pain through their skull. So they have that, they feel that pain because they're human beings, right? Everything that flows in your body, my body, flows and goes unborn children into this world.
For sure.
So we have that. So they feel that pain, they feel that cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
And we have in this as well, when we brought together, how people view that imprisonment, how reformers view imprisonment. And tell us a little bit about that, because their notion is that imprisonment can be cruel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell us a little about how they see that.
Yeah, imprisonment, involves the processes of how we deal with criminals, whether they, should go back to trial or be released. If not, if they have done horrendous acts throughout their life, should they be worthy of the death penalty, and the different ways that is held, depending on the state that you are in. But as you said, we view that process, even the death penalty, to be cruel, because we believe that that person is valuable, even though the mistakes that they have made
Exactly.
be ended up in prison.
Right, so the reformers, the imprisonment reformers, they view as prisons could be, they're inhumane.
Yeah.
And there's the article, one of the articles here that we have. It's a blog, like a psych blog from Penn State's website, and it dealt with that. That blog dealt with the condition of the prison, how inhumane. And it says this, right? Our prisons are inhumane and don't meet this requirement because after someone's incarcerated, we don't treat them like humans anymore. They're not treated like humans anymore. And it continues. Just recently in Brooklyn, prisoners were without heat and electricity for days in the winter weather. What we need to understand is that the sentence is the punishment, and denying prisoners the right to freedom is okay. However, it's not okay when we deny them their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Prison conditions should not be an additional punishment. So they view that as being inhumane, as cruel.
Yeah.
Because the way they're being treated. So we consider that being inhumane and cruel, but when it deals with abortion, how do we view that? Like, how does our society view that, Hector, in our day and age? How does our society views abortion today?
Yeah, we view abortion that it is, acceptable under certain conditions, and of course others will say acceptable regardless. Because if you don't even consider the person, the unborn child to be a person, then it's not considered a cruel act, or it can't be inhumane, and that leads to moral issues.
Exactly. Because if they consider prisoners, like the reformers consider imprisonment being uncruel, because you're denying their rights. What rights are we referring to?
Right.
And I think we know what rights are. Human rights.
Yes.
our human rights to express ourselves, our human rights to live on this earth, right? To not be impeded, the ability to live out our lives. And that deals with abortion. If we look at abortion, we're actually impeding that unborn child to live out that process of life. We're impeding them to have the right to live. And that if we see imprisonment as being cruel, we have to see abortion as being cruel as well. We can't, there's no way that one of them is inhumane and cruel and the other is not. I don't think we can hold that stance. So it's really, I think we're really confused on what is cruel is and what is humane is. Another article deals with that fact too about the imprisonment, and I know we're staying on this because it's the same article, right?
Yeah.
That deals with that. And can you touch on that? What else was stated on that blog from Penn State?
Well, like you were saying, reformists, they consider, should the punishment actually fit the crime deserving of that criminal. And I know that the article goes on to say, one requirement of the justice system is that punishments should be proportional to the crimes. And it says, although that, it's true for individuals that might receive what they do deserve, we still have to ask ourselves, is the action being carried out cruel to them? Like, as we said, receiving up to that penalty.
Right, exactly. So, for those that don't understand being proportional, what does that mean in your eyes? What does being that the punishment should be proportional to the crime? What does that mean in your eyes?
So, it's being able to, of course, through the justice system, to weigh on how horrendous the act was committed by the criminal, of course, and to see basically the extent to what they deserve for the crime they have committed.
Right. So, the punishment has to fit your crime.
Yeah.
In other words, right? So, if I stole something, there's no way I should receive a death penalty.
Correct. Yeah.
If I broke into someone's car, right, committed theft, there's no way I should receive the death penalty. But if I took someone else's life, someone's life, and their innocent life, if I took their life, and then I should deserve the death penalty, right? I take that stance because I see how sacred life is. God views life as sacred as well. And there's something within the Bible, I know, that we know for those that study the Bible, understand how God gave His laws, how He established them, and what He told Noah as well. When Noah, right after the flood, He opened up the ark and He told them that, I'm just going to paraphrase that. If blood is shed, if someone's life was taken innocently, took their lives, that your blood should be shed as well, right? A punishment, right? It should be a punishment for it. So it should fit the crime. So how about the case with abortion? Is that did the unborn, the embryo fetus, committed a crime?
No, definitely not. They have no opportunity, to even develop their life. So we're already committing that action, basically the same, giving them the death penalty even before anything happens.
Exactly. So before that child, the unborn child, was born into the world and be able to develop and make decisions on their own, it seems like they're being treated as criminals.
Yeah.
And I don't think an unborn child, an innocent child, because an unborn child is an actual innocent child. They have no clue what's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think in my eyes, in your eyes, they should be treated as criminals, because to be extrapolated, aborted intentionally, and that's what almost exclusively abortion deals with, right? That word that is defined as abortion almost exclusively deals with the intention. I don't think a child has ever committed a crime, an unborn child. So I don't think they deserve that. Am I right or wrong, Hector?
No,
they deserve
right.
that?
They fall under being as innocent still.
Exactly. They fall under being innocent. So we brought all these points dealing with the medical standpoint of what abortion the complication that abortion brings, and also in our eyes. And I think if we really understand what morality is, it's going to be true in everyone's eyes that abortion is cruel. It's something inhumane, because if we state that other things are inhumane when in actuality they might not be inhumane, and we consider them as being inhumane, like for example imprisonment, how can abortion not be cruel and not be inhumane? I think it's impossible to say that it is not. And imprisonment is inhumane and cruel. So we brought those points: medical, what is considered as cruel and inhumane, and the arguments of the pro-abortionists. And let's jump on this briefly, because I know our time is running short, and we still have our points to bring across as why we stand for pro-life, right? Through the biblical view of God's view, right? So, why do we consider the pro-abortionist arguments flawed? And let's start off with the privacy argument.
For sure. So for this stance, for the privacy argument, we ask the question that has to be answered: is there an absoluteness to the right of privacy?
Exactly.
If we can answer that question, then we will be able to distinguish how this argument stands. And one thing we noted here was that the point that has to be considered is that the right to privacy infringes on someone else's right of privacy. So when we're analyzing this argument, we have to ask, is it going against someone else's right as well?
Exactly. So are we violating someone else's privacy as well? And I know all of us, we have privacy. We should have privacy for our own lives. But can that privacy, and that's the question, is there an absoluteness to that privacy? In other words, that simply because I have the right of privacy, should my right of privacy infringe on your right of privacy as a human being?
No, we each have our own right.
We all each have our own right. So there's no absoluteness to that. In other words, that yes, I have a right of privacy, but my right of privacy cannot infringe on your right of privacy, because you have your right of privacy as well as a human being.
And unlike abortionists might think, or the stance that they may take, there actually is these, like we discussed, these boundaries, or this point in which you are invading someone else's privacy, whether you might see it that way or not.
Exactly, because now you're infringing on the right of that child, their privacy, to life.
Yes.
To life. So that's one of the arguments, and I think that is flawed. And we could bring other points to that using that Privacy Act. But I think this is a very good point, because you're infringing. So there's no absoluteness to right of privacy, because once you infringe on someone else's privacy, now you're violating their privacy as well. So there's no absoluteness to it. Now, let's go to the other point, the other argument, quality of life argument. And I like this one a lot as well. So how do we view this argument as being flawed, Hector?
Sure thing. We think this is flawed, first of all, by answering the question, can we jeopardize life by choice? And of course, on our stance, we're saying, this is happening. We are jeopardizing someone's life when we choose it. In this argument, we see it has no stable stance in itself. And that's for a lot of different reasons, but two that I can give you here is, one, the potential of deformity or defect, as we were saying, that can be a burden on a family. We do not know the full outcome of that. In other words, you cannot determine the unborn child's life just because they might be born with a deformity.
Yes.
They can still succeed. They can still become something great based on factors that we don't know or can't see in the moment. And we see that in life with other people who have done it.
And that is true, Hector. Those with degrees of inabilities or difficulties in their lives, right? I remember, it just came to my mind now, it was quite some time ago, that on the news, It was an article on a mentally challenged boy or young adult, and he opened up his own business.
Wow.
And I just don't recall right now the article, but the headline. But it dealt with that and how that young adult, that young man, with his complications, with his so-called incapacities or lack of capacities, he was able to open up his own business. He treated every one of his customers like they were part of family, and people loved him. So it doesn't determine the deformities, the complications don't determine the outcome, like you stated. It does not determine the outcome of how successful or how prosperous someone can become.
Definitely, yeah. Everyone has the opportunity, to make something of themselves. But again, it's about giving them that opportunity from the very first step.
Exactly, and especially here in the United States, because our view, and generally speaking, we live in a capitalist nation, right? We don't have that socialistic, not as of yet, socialistic view, that Marxist view, that if you're not fit, if you can't contribute in any type of fashion, you shouldn't belong. You should not live. Well, we see with that young man, he opened up his own business, and that's the miraculous thing about allowing the individual, not having that view, Marxist view, allowing that individual to be able to be born, develop, and they're not going to become a burden. So that's part of it, and which is very good. And also, there's another point in there, the response to the moral obligation that we have, right? That responsibility that you and I should have towards our fellow human being. And I think we should have that. We should take on a responsibility for others. And the Bible says that God made us stewards of this world. Not just of everything He has created on earth, but also of our fellow human beings. I'm here to make you better, and you're here to make me better. And the Bible says iron sharpens iron. We need each other. We're an organism, we're a unit. So that moral responsibility, once when we don't have that sense of moral responsibility, that obligation, because it is an obligation.
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll see abortion as being equitable, because we don't take on that moral responsibility, or we don't have it as an obligation. So that's part of it. And also, there's another point in here, the probable potential future care. What's that point about? Probable potential of future care.
Future care, basically it's being able, to have probably the means to be able to take care or become a caregiver, or if you're, of course, the parent of the child, having those resources to be able to actually take care of the child that might have a deformity or have some type of issue that's causing a burden for the family.
Exactly. And not just that, but also that there could be a possibility that something horrendous happens later on in the future.
Yeah.
And now, the care that you give to the child or to a loved one changes drastically.
Yeah.
And what we mean by that is, for example, say if I was in a car accident, and now out of that car accident, I go through a stage of paralysis. In other words, I'm paralyzed. I no longer can function as a person, as a human being. So there's always the potential that a different type of care has to be given. And so that does not mean that we should just abort a child or abort someone or take the life of someone away. No, it's just we should take on our moral obligation and responsibility to care.
Yeah, making those adjustments, it has to be done.
Exactly. And I don't think, as children, we should view children as a burden. We should view children as diamonds by consideration, because you have worth, I have worth, Hector. I don't know how you would have felt that if your mother had in her mind, or myself, and I'm going to put myself, okay? I don't want to put you in the spot, but I know for a fact that if my mother would have had thoughts of abortion, or had considered, not just thoughts, because sometimes thoughts come into our minds, the devil plays over our minds at times, but considered going through an abortion. And me knowing that fact, I will view myself as not having value for my mother, and not being viewed in her eyes as being cherished. Because I think I should be considered as important, especially to my mother, because she carried me.
That's
right? She's the one that's going to give birth to me. So when we don't view children as diamonds, and we only view them as a burden, I always say, yes, abortion is ethical. Abortion is fine, because we're looking at children as a burden, and that not as something precious. And diamonds, if you talk to any woman, they want a diamond ring or something, because they know diamond has a lot of value. So we can touch on all those, and the non-personhood argument, we're going to touch on that briefly. So how is this flawed? How do we consider non-personhood argument as being flawed?
Sure thing. So for this one, we got to answer the question: should we determine the measure of a person's life? And if so, how do we determine that measure in the first place? And for this section, I ended up looking at some research in the excerpt from the ethics of abortion.
Yes.
They ended up saying that, unlike personhood theories, which is famous for Mary Warden's,
Yes.
Who's a very strong abortionist in her writings, it said that this does not straightforwardly entitles the killing of children or infants, that it is indeed to be a wrong action. And for the same reason, it is wrong to kill anyone else, of course.
Exactly.
We have to see it as the same process.
Right. We have to see it as the same process, that we're killing that unborn child, we're killing them, and what we're actually doing is killing another human being,
Exactly.
a person. And we know that within that view, we had those two definitions which dealt with functionalistic definition and essentialistic, and we're going to just deal with the functionalistic, why it's so flawed. And one of the reasons that we consider it is because there could be a time, a point in anyone's life that they no longer be able to function as a human being. And one example is when someone is schizophrenic. And when someone's schizophrenic, they no longer view the world normally, because there's some abnormal aspects to being going through that process of being schizophrenic. Right? You no longer view the world as you should view the world normally. You no longer view yourself normally. There's people within that have gone through that, or schizophrenic, that if they're not under some type of medication, there's no way they can live a normal life. So now, functionality, if that's the case, if to only determine a person to the capacity of functionality to be a person, that person is no longer a person in their eyes, right? Am I right on?
That's correct.
What was that again, Hector?
Yeah, that person would have lost their personhood just because they can't function in the ways that measures of what a person is.
Exactly. So now, should they be considered to be expelled or expendable? Should they be considered to their lives to be taken away?
Oh, of course not. If it was that, then we would see all the elderly people or those who have these inabilities just being killed off as if they were not important to society, but that's not the case, especially here in America. We see them still having that value of being a human.
Exactly, because they still are persons.
Yes.
There's a personhood hidden inside them, even though at times you might not see that. You can see them because the lack of function, but that does not determine their personhood.
Correct.
What determines their personhood is that you're human beings.
That's right.
Their intrinsic value. So you have all those, and then we can go on, but we want to touch on, due to biblical stance, why we are pro-choice. how God views human beings, right? So hit on that a little bit, Hector. And I know there's a question that we have there: why Christians stand for pro-life?
So to begin this section off, we first looked at, before, of course, our society today, how was it in biblical times?
Yes.
And abortion, of course, apparently was already something that was being carried out. It was part of the Greek and the Roman culture, and they would do this as a form of birth control, which was infanticide. They would literally take the unborn children and kill them off to be able to regulate how much distribution will go out to families and to make sure they had enough resources. And of course to make sure that generations wouldn't grow too big to overthrow those government powers.
Wow.
So they had this system as a regular practice. And in comparison to the Judeo-Christians at those times, the Jewish, they always considered abortion to be as murder because, of course, it's taking away from someone's life, that precious child.
Yes.
Not knowing what that gift would be, especially in biblical times, that child could be the heritage and the financial stance of a family.
Yes.
So that would put families in big crisis at the time as well.
Exactly. So imagine this, right? At the Judeo-Christian view, that if Jesus Christ was a burden, because first of all, they were a poor family.
Yeah.
Right? Joseph and Mary were a very poor family, and they were young.
Yeah.
They usually at that time, during the biblical times, and probably until maybe the 1900s, early 1900s, that usually couples would come together and get married at an early age.
Yeah.
Manhood started a lot earlier as opposed to what we consider manhood, and also a woman, what we consider now.
Mm-hmm.
So some really speculate that Joseph and Mary, they were teenagers, 14, 15 years old. So if they consider it as a burden, Jesus Christ would never been born into this world. Thank God that at that time it wasn't considered that, especially for the Judeo Hebrew, right? The Jew. They saw value in having children. There's a lot of Psalms that relate to that point of how the arrows are in the quiver, and the children are as such. And at that time, the arrows were so important, right, for battle and stuff like that, for hunting purposes. So very, very important. So that was a form of control, right? The Greeks and the Romans to control, and some of our countries today use that.
We have a popular example that we all know about, especially in Asian countries. We have seen it. The limitations of how many female childs can be born because of the financial liability that they end up being to the economy.
Right. So the so-called financial, that deals with Marxism. I know we touched that on before, the socialistic view. What else? What other point do we have in there, Hector?
Sure thing. We also see that if we were to analyze the original medical principle and oath that these doctors swear into as they're getting their license, in the original language it talks about how doctors are meant to preserve life.
Yes.
And to bring healing or bring repair, versus the action of taking away life, which is always seen to be an act that belongs to God's hands.
Yes.
However He chooses to manifest that. But a doctor is always to preserve, not take away the life.
Exactly. And there's also the apostolic decree that deals about that as well. The list in order to abstain from bloodshed. We know that. So why our view of what abortion is, we know it's unethical, it's not moral, so we consider that as the shedding of innocent blood.
Yes.
So, and one of the Proverbs deals with that too. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16 to 19, that there's 6 things that God detests, and one of the things is the shedding of innocent blood.
Yes.
It states it in there, and how God views it. So, and going from there, and how we as Christians, I'm a Christian, so is Hector.
Yeah.
We know where Christ has brought us from, and we're followers of Christ, and that's why we're considered as Christians. So our view as Christians, we see the value, right? We value the sanctity of life and the intrinsic moral value that it has, and that human beings have. And this has to do with the born and unborn, or the unborn and born.
That's right.
Right? And there are several reasons why, and we're going to state some of those reasons. So, give us a first reason why we value the sanctity of life, and also we find intrinsic moral value.
Well, I think this is like the pinnacle reason, based on our Christian faith, and it is that all humans, creation by God, is buried in His image. That when He created us, and since the very beginning of Genesis, that He gave us His image, so we have that value as humans, because now we are a mirror of Him. We are a reflection of what it is to be a person, to have those same characteristics that God has as well.
And that goes to say that God is a person as well. So I know that's for some other topic.
Yeah, definitely.
So we bear God's image, and because God is a person, and there's value in God. And if we don't see that there's value in God, we're missing out on who God is.
That's how it is.
God is He's awesome. He's been so great to us. He has blessed us. He saved us from sin. He saved us from depravity. He saved us from destruction. And He wants us to live with Him, right? Have that connection with Him, that relationship with Him. So there's value in God. And since He created us in His image, that value is passed forth unto us as well. Because we bear God's image, right? His likeness and His image. So that's one of the points. Because God created us in His image. We're bearers of God's image. What's the second point?
The second point is that personhood is ascribed to the embryo or human by biblical, it says injunction, which is seen within the eyes of the, if I'm saying this correctly, juridical system, which is established in Exodus.
Yes. If you read the book of Exodus, that aspect, it deals with the harm to the mother and the harm to the child.
Yes.
If there's any harm comes to them, and how the person that dealt that harm had to be dealt with under that judicial system that God placed in His people. So God's seeing value in the embryo.
That's right.
Because if He didn't see value, now there would have been an injunction that had to be carried out. Right?
Yeah.
They had to pay a price. There was a punishment. So, a biblical injunction. Right? Another point too, God recognizes the personhood of the unborn and knows them.
That's seen throughout. That's right.
It's seen throughout. One of the famous verses, or better known verses, is found where? Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Amen. That God calls out Jeremiah. And I don't remember the verse off the top of my head now. But God sees.
And you're right, it's right before you were born.
Before you were born. Hey, there you go. I just had a Hector with my mind. Amen. So before you were born, I knew you.
Yes.
I knew you. So God recognizes their personhood, because in order to know someone, there has to be some type of personhood, or they have to be a person. There's a personhood present. Because you know who they are. He knew them by their name. He knew Jeremiah by his wants and his needs. He knew Jeremiah as an individual. So before you were born, I knew you. I knew you. That's part of personhood. Also, the next point deals with vocation. Right? And there was a prophet, Isaiah the prophet, and God called him. His vocation was tied to him being a person.
Yes.
So God called him to be a prophet, and that was tied into his personhood, his calling, his vocation. And it's the same thing with Jeremiah as well. When God called Jeremiah, God already had in his mind, I'm calling you to a vocation to be a prophet. So before you were born, I knew you. When I knew you were going to be a prophet, this vocation is tied into your personhood. So you have all those that is tied in, the vocation is tied into personhood throughout conception even unto adulthood. So that vocation is tied in. The next point is, and can you talk about this a little bit? It's a Greek word that is used in the Bible.
So yeah, this Greek word, I believe it's pronounced "grifos," which is babe in the New James Version, and baby in the New International NIV, excuse me. And it is ascribed both to the unborn and the born child.
So that same Greek word, when you read it in the New Testament, is used for the unborn. And one example is from John the Baptist, right? Child. And then it relates to the born as well. So that same Greek word, that's what is used within the biblical text. They've seen the unborn and born as persons. The biblical principle of love, which is directed to all human beings, whether they have been born into this world or not. Since the Bible attributes to everyone personhood. So that the biblical principle of love, in other words, that we have to love humanity.
Yes.
We have to love each other. And that is to the unborn as well. And abortion, what it does, what it describes, in our view, it describes that love is not being shown or given to the unborn.
And it breaks that principle of love also, because you gotta treat the others as you want to be loved, or as you want to be treated.
As
so
yourself.
You wouldn't treat someone else, or basically what you're doing to that unborn child, you wouldn't want that for your own self.
Exactly. You won't want anyone to take your life because you have the intrinsic value and the right to live. Also, sin is imputed to the whole world. Great example was David.
Yeah.
He said, "In sin I was born." Psalms chapter 51.
Yeah.
In sin I was born into sin, right? So he was born. Relating to an incident that took place in his life. Romans chapter 5, verse 12 to 14 relates to that as well.
Correct.
That sin came into this world. And because of Adam, where he represents the whole human race as a whole.
Yeah.
Now sin is imputed to everyone. And if sin is imputed to everyone, that means everyone is a person. Has personhood. And also, the unborn responsiveness to stimuli. We talked about this, and this goes back to the biblical text that we used at the beginning. Right? What happened there?
Well, it says as the young mother of Mary, Mary being a young mother, bearing the child of Jesus within her womb, she goes to visit Elizabeth, which is also a relative of her. And when the two women are close in the same room, the womb or the belly of Elizabeth begins to basically move or shake violently, because that unborn child is in the presence of the unborn child of Jesus as well.
Amen. So that stimulates, that tells you he's a person. And it tells you that John, and that was his name to be given, right? He jumped, leaped, or whatever the case, kicked, right? Mothers feel this, that responsiveness to stimuli. That tells you that the unborn is a baby. So we're going to close out with this. And this last one, we're going to go just briefly through it. When does life not become significant and valuable? And I don't think there's ever a point that life is not significant and it does not have value. Throughout conception to death, human life has value. Right? Whether from baby to childhood, childhood to adolescence, there isn't one moment, because there's a continuum of the human race, of the person, through development. So there's never one point in time that we as individuals not become persons. We're always persons. There's always a personhood in us. And this is a true premise. And if that's the case, then regardless of what we go through in life, regardless if we have Alzheimer's, regardless if we're schizophrenic, regardless if we have complications later on. Regardless if we find ourselves in a coma, it doesn't take away from our significance. It doesn't take away from our value. We're persons. We're people. Where we have personhood. So there's a continuum, regardless of what whoever might say otherwise. So if that's the case, right? And this is the last point. So if this is a true premise, right? A true premise has to be set. So if this is true, a premise has to be set forth that equal intrinsic moral value and significance has to be applied to the unborn because of her state of humanness, right? The state of humanity. And we'll leave it with this. And I don't know if can you quote this, or can you point this out? What this philosopher said?
Sort of thing. So there's a Christian philosopher named Scott Rye, and he takes the approach, which goes saying this, that equaling the unborn child in the womb with a child or adult out of the womb. And this is the approach that should be taken, as he suggests, which is the following 4 principles that we have marked here.
Right.
And those principles go on to say that God attributes the same characteristics to the unborn as the adult, that therefore God considers the unborn a person. Abortion is killing an innocent person. And finally, killing innocent persons violates the 5th commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13.
Amen. So, equating the unborn to an adult,
yes,
that should be the moral stance that we should take. And as Christians, that's what we take. That's the point of view. That's our stance. We're pro-choice.
yes.
You have value. Your unborn child has value, right? And Hector, I know we're directing it to the audience, to all those that are listening to us. That child in your womb, it's a person. And they have personhood. You're valuable, and so is that unborn child, and every unborn child as well. So that's the reason why we take the stance of being pro-life.
Yes.
Because there is value, but we consider the unborn and the born as valuable. And God, so does God.
Yes.
And I think every Christian, not that I think, no, every Christian should take that stance. Let's put our political views aside,
Yes.
right? Let's put aside our circumstances. God will take care of our needs.
Yes.
God will take care of the needs of the child as well. And you never know what that child will become in the future.
That's how it is.
Will become in the future. So let's pray this moment, and hopefully that throughout this session, which is a lengthy session, we could have spoken even more on it,
Yeah.
other points as well, but hopefully you got a grasp of what abortion is. And take the right stance for God. Take the right stance for your child. Take the right stance for that unborn child. Whether one of your family members is is pregnant, has an unborn child, and right now are considering to abort that child, then stand up. Tell them how much you love them and how much you love that child as well.
Yes.
And let's pray this moment, and we're going to pray that when God can bless you and guide you in all your decisions that you make. And that's also the church, that we can take the proper stance. Especially in our time of age, where socialistic views are it seems like they're predominant in our society. And that's the reason why I think abortion came into play and became legalized back in 1973. So let's pray this moment, and we're going to close out too. So let's pray. Thank you, Father, for everything, God, and for all the points, Father, that were pointed out, God. We ask you to continue to bless us, and look at our audience, those that were listening to us, Father, that they can consider how precious a child is, whether unborn and born, God. That there are people, there are persons, they have value, they have intrinsic value. So I ask you to God every individual, God every woman, God, that's in the process of bearing a child. And then they can ask themselves a question. Do they have value? Because they were born into this world and they do have value. So Father, guide them. And guide the church and help us to take the proper stance, Father, in this view that we're pro-life. Because you value life, we should value life as well. And so we ask you for all those that are not saved, bless them and save them. And for that mother, God, that's in between those decisions, God, whether to abort or not. That, Father, she could make the right choice, God. In the name of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ. And we thank you for everyone, God. Amen. So thank you, Hector, for being our guest. And hopefully we can do this again some other time. So God bless everyone. Thank you for tuning in.